The scripture reading is in Matthew 15:21 through 28. From there, Jesus went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from those territories came out and shouted, "Show mercy, Son of David. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." But he didn't respond to her at all. His disciples came and urged him, "Send her away. She keeps shouting out after us." Jesus replied, "I've been sent only to the lost sheep, the people of Israel." But she knelt before him and said, "Lord, help me." He replied, "It is not good to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall off their master's table." Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. It will be just as you wish." And right then her daughter was healed. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Let us pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our God, our strength, our Redeemer. Amen. Have you ever had to deal with difficult people? Maybe at work, maybe at school, maybe in the community or the church, maybe even in your own family. How do you deal with them? Do you confront them? Do you challenge them, argue with them, debate with them? Do you try to overpower them or intimidate them or bully them or embarrass them? Or do you just ignore them? Jesus faced difficult and challenging people all the time, and especially here in this 15th chapter of Matthew and the verses that Mary read for us this morning. In the verses just prior to this, Jesus is in his home territory in Galilee, and a group of Pharisees and scribes come to him and say that, in a challenging way to Jesus, trying to embarrass him and discredit him in front of a crowd of people and his disciples, and say, "Why are your disciples breaking the elders' rules? For they are not ritually purifying their hands by washing them before they eat." Now, countermands, this is not a hygiene question, but it's about a religious ritual that was imposed by the teachers of the law, meant to be practiced by the people of the faith. And to their question, Jesus responds and says, "Well, why have you broken the commandment of God by keeping rules handed down to you? For God said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' in the 5th commandment." You see, Jesus knew that laws had been created by men that allowed them to ignore their obligation of financial support that was needed and necessary to care for their aging parents. So Jesus reinforces their confrontation, refocuses their confrontation, and says, it's not what goes into the mouth that contaminates a person, but it is what comes out of the mouth that contaminates the person. And then after an explanation of that statement to the disciples, the next thing we know, Jesus is leaving Galilee with the disciples, and they're headed off northwest into Phoenicia, which is now part of Syria. They're headed toward the Mediterranean coastal cities of Sidon and Tyre, and it's Gentile territory. And in Jesus' day, Gentile territory meant that it was filled with Canaanites, who were ancient enemies of the Jews. So as they travel along, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this Canaanite woman and starts shouting and yelling, "Have mercy upon me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is suffering from a terrible demon possession." And what does Jesus do? I would think my why Jesus would want to stop and talk with her. But in Matthew, Jesus does nothing. The scripture says he didn't even answer her at all. I tried that with some difficult people in my life, but I never found that to have a favorable outcome for me. Then the disciples come to Jesus and say, "Send her away. This woman keeps shouting and yelling and disturbing us. Can't you get rid of her?" I've had members in previous congregations who would come to me and say, "Tom, would you look at these crazy makers in the church? Would you just drive them out and get rid of them?" Then Jesus replies, "I've only come to the lost sheep of the people of Israel. And I've tried what seems to be a flippant remark on Jesus' part about with difficult people, but I never found that my flippant remarks worked well either. But this woman is undeterred. She won't be ignored, nor will she easily give up. So what does she do? She no longer follows them along, but she comes around, gets in front, kneels down in front of Jesus, and says, 'Lord, help me.' And then for the first time, Jesus addresses her directly. He uses a very crude analogy and compares Jews to children and Canaanites or Gentiles to dogs. And says to her, it's not right to take children's bread and toss it to dogs. Now to me, Jesus comes off as rather prejudiced, rather racist towards this marginalized Canaanite woman. But in the context of the day, we must remember first that Jews had nothing to do with Canaanites. After all, they were ancient enemies that go way back in time, way back to when Joshua came in, conquered Jericho, and settled the promised land. Ever since then, they've been enemies of each other. And this woman is making a fuss and a commotion and a demand of woman. It's one thing if it would be a Canaanite man, but this is a Canaanite woman. So there's two strikes against her right there. One being a Canaanite, two being a woman. And Jews were known to look down upon the Canaanites, and it was common that they would refer to them as dogs. But then seemingly unresentful of the analogy, this woman persists. And with the framework of Jesus' statement, she continues and says, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall off their master's table." Whoa. This woman just one-upped Jesus. I could see her doing a high five if she had any friends around. And Jesus doesn't have a comeback. He doesn't have a comeback to her retort of his analogy. So chalk one up for this woman. She stopped it. Now, some biblical scholars suggest that this is Matthew's way to use the story to say that Jesus came not only for the people of Israel, but Jesus came for all of the people of the world. Because Matthew closes his gospel when Jesus ascends and says to the disciples for them to go into all the world, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching everything that Jesus had commanded them, and that promises that he will be with them to the end of the age. But what does Jesus do for this Canaanite woman? He recognizes her as one who has struggled. She struggled with his reluctance to help her, but in her persistence and in her prayer, she has shown great faith. So Jesus affirms her and says, "Woman, your faith is great. It will be as you wish." And Matthew says right then her daughter was healed. So how do you deal with difficult people? Or better yet, how do you love difficult people? couple of weeks ago during the coffee fellowship time after worship, I sat at the table with Jeff Auger and thought, it'll take a moment or two to get to know him a little bit better, have a chance to visit. Sat down, there were other folks at the table, we visited, we learned things about Jeff. Not long after that, as some people began to break away, Pastor Lauren came over and sat down, and we talked, and as folks, and Sue had finished all of her business with different folks, she came over, she sat down, we sat and talked for a few minutes, and the next thing we know, we looked around the room, and we were the only 4 people left in the church. There's only one thing you do at that point, so I looked at Lauren and Jeff and said, guys want to go out to lunch? So we went to Bullwinkel's and sat down and talked. And over our lunch conversation, Pastor Lauren said that we talked about her being away, talked about the struggle and stress that meant coming home, having to preach on Sunday, and to top it off, he had a funeral on Saturday. It was somewhere in there that I heard words escape my mouth that said, you know, I could preach for you on that Sunday if that would be helpful. And those words no longer escaped my mouth, and I heard Lauren say, that sure would be a great idea, Tom. So here I am today. That's how this came to be. So I agreed to do this, and out of fairness to Lauren, she said I could do anything I wanted to do this morning, and I said, well, you know, you're doing a series, just send me the basic stuff that you start out with, I'll look at it and see if I can make any sense of it. So, when I got the email, I looked at it, it said the text was Matthew 15:12-28, I thought, oh good, that's a great story. I can work with that. The title, How to Love Difficult People, I thought, yeah, I've known difficult people in my life. I've known many throughout my career in the church. Be they lay people or clergy colleagues, in quotes. And the seed for the thought of the day said, let's consider what's difficult about love by looking at people in our lives who are hard to love. Do you know people who are always negative, critical, ego-driven, self-absorbed, and seems that the whole world revolves around them? And my mind just lit up with all kinds of people. But one of the first things I did was I thought, okay, I'll just put those in the back of my mind. I need to have something else to say. So I turned on my computer, and you know that little box down in the lower left-hand corner that says search? You know, you click on that, and then you type in something. So I thought, this will be fun. I'll type in, how do you love difficult people? I typed that in, I hit send, my screen lit up. I found that there are all kinds of people who are out there to offer you advice. There were YouTube videos that I could watch on how to deal with difficult people. There were book suggestions like The Toughest People to Love, How to Understand Them. How to love the hard-to-love people in your life. How to hug a porcupine. I steered away from that one. One website even had a suggestion. They had a statement there that said, the biggest obstacle to loving difficult people is to think, I will love them, but they will have to become better first. And I thought, Then I read the next sentence and says, if you wait for difficult people to become better, then your loving them will be doomed to disappointment from the beginning. But one little book that did pop up that looked interesting was by a Reverend Dr. William Smith, who's a pastor, a counselor somewhere in Pennsylvania. He suggests that learning to love difficult people starts with an understanding that God's love is not just for them, but it's for you too. You need God's love and forgiveness just as much as they do. And knowing the love of God will challenge your attitude, your goals, your actions toward the difficult people in your life. It might encourage them to change too. And he suggested 4 steps for learning how to love difficult people. He says, first, you pray for your own heart. Next, you pray for them. Third, you move toward them and not away from them. And fourth, you give them grace just as God has given grace to you. Over the past couple of weeks, I've thought about people who have been difficult for me to love. Most of my thinking focused on church people, I'll admit, both members of congregations as well as ordained ministry colleagues, and some other conference administrators who will go unmentioned. But the man that I would speak of this morning was from the first church that I served. I'd served 7 years as a pastor in 2 larger churches, and then all of a sudden, in my early 30s, I was out on my own. This man was on the staff parish committee. He came to all of the church council meetings, as well as attending my weekly Tuesday night adult Bible study. He also was a good friend of the previous pastor, who was a friend of mine. Anyway, what made this person difficult to love, at least in my opinion, was that he always seemed negative toward my ministry and critical of most all of the things that I said or did. For example, at one of the staff parish meetings, he always had something negative to say about how I used my time professionally or how I spent my leisure time. And at one church council meeting that had a short agenda, and we were going to get done early, the chair, who I liked and respected, looked at his watch and said, "You know, it looks like we're going to get done early. Does anybody have anything else they would like to bring up tonight?" My head dropped. I knew whose hand was going up, and sure enough, Roger's hand was the first hand up, and he proceeds to say, "I don't think the pastor should preach from the Sunday comics. He should be made to preach straight from the Bible." Well, that little bombshell made everybody in the room quiet and squirm. It's one of those times when there's no contact in the group. Everyone is either looking at the floor, looking at the ceiling, looking at their watch, wishing they were anywhere but in that particular room. And what I had done was simply the previous Sunday, as an illustration, I chose my favorite person of gloom and doom, making a point about something that folks said couldn't be done, and I knew that we could do it. It was this character, if you remember reading Snuffy Smith and Barney Google and the Funny Papers. Now, I can't remember the guy's name, and I spent probably 20 minutes searching it on the internet, and this guy's never came. I can name almost all of the other characters from Snuffy Smith's column, but there was this little guy that went around and always had a black cloud over his head, and wherever he went, something bad happened to the person that was in the strip for that day. And that was the illustration that I used. Well, we got out of that evening, and time went on, time passed by, weeks, months, and now it's Holy Week, and it's Maundy Thursday. And as being a new pastor and wanting to do something new and different, I thought, on Maundy Thursday, we should do a foot washing. I thought that would be kind of cool. You remember Jesus washed the disciples' feet at the night of the Last Supper? So rather than having everyone involved in this, I figured, well, maybe I can choose one person and wash their feet. except that as time went on, it seemed that Lent went fast that year, and I was planning on doing this, and I had the things together for it. I'd done everything but give somebody a warning ahead of time that I was going to call on you. I mean, I knew that I could always call on Sue. She would volunteer for that, or if not volunteer, she would try to not make me look bad and come forward. But in those days, I figured we were probably dealing with things like pantyhose, and that wouldn't be good. Have to figure that out. So I looked around the room, and as we're sitting there, I looked down, and about the third row, sitting on the aisle, is my friend Roger. And I looked at him and asked him to come forward. And being the good-hearted, beautiful person that he was, he stood, he walked up. I put a steel chair stage center, had brought a old porcelain basin and pitcher from home, had a couple of soft towels there, asked him to sit down. He sat, I kneeled, I eased off, untied his shoes, slipped them off, took off his socks, rolled up his pant cuff, put his foot into the water, washed it, dried it, did the same with the second foot, put everything back on, gave him a hand to help him stand up, and we embraced. And he proceeded to have me be seated and wash my feet. I'd like to tell you that we became fishing buddies or hunting buddies or things after that. That never happened. Wasn't looking for that. But in that moment, at least one heart was changed, and maybe two. So how do you love difficult people? You pray first for your own heart, then you pray for them and their heart. Then you move toward them and not away, and you be sure to give them all the grace that God has, just as God has given you grace. And how does Jesus love difficult people? He said to that Canaanite woman, people who persevere and endure life's struggles with the love and the grace and the mercy you have reveal a great faith to the rest of us. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the morning and the time that we share. We ask that your word may find a way to speak to us and touch our hearts as we worship together this day. But as we have come, we offer you this prayer, but also ask that you hear as we pray together our Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.